Who was the naked boy in the Garden of Gethsemane? You say, a naked boy? Yeah, there was a naked boy in the Garden of Gethsemane. Listen to what the Bible tells us in Mark chapter 14, 51 and 52. And there followed him a certain young man having a linen cloth cast about his, listen to this, naked body. Having a certain linen cloth cast about his naked body, and the young men, that's all the soldiers that were there, the young men laid hold on him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. What in the world is this? You know, I read this for many years, and I would always think, who was the naked kid in the Garden of Gethsemane? Why in the world was there a naked boy in the Garden of Gethsemane? And I could never find anybody that could really give me an answer that satisfied me. I'd read a lot of silly answers in commentaries, but I knew they were silly. They just didn't make any sense. So when I began to write Sparkling Gems from the Greek, I decided that I was going to look at this phrase, linen cloth. And do you know what I found out? That word linen cloth is one of those Greek words that can only be used one way and no other way. This word linen cloth described a burial shroud, a burial shroud. In fact, it was the very same word which was used to describe the cloth that was put on Jesus' body when Jesus was prepared for his burial, the very same Greek word. It was a cloth that was made in Egypt. All of these were made in Egypt because the Egyptians were very big at the way they buried their dead, and they always used very fine linen cloths. And this word would only be used to describe a linen cloth for the burial of the dead. Well, among the Jews, when the wealthy Jews buried their dead, they used the finest materials, and they always buried the dead naked and covered them with a linen cloth. And if they were rich, they purchased this linen cloth which came from Egypt, which is exactly the Greek word which is used here. Well, you have to understand that the Garden of Gethsemane was in the middle of a graveyard. In fact, it's one of the oldest burial sites in all of Jerusalem. It's a holy site. It is still a holy site. There are graves that go all the way up to the top of that mountain because they believe that whoever's built on the side of that mountain will rise first in the resurrection. They've believed that for years and years and thousands of years. So even at the time of Jesus, there were graves all around that place, but mainly people buried there were very wealthy people. Well, on that night, when Jesus said, "I am He," and so much power was released with His words that it knocked 300 to 600 soldiers back onto the ground, that same power reached over and touched a little boy that had just been laid in his grave. He's a naked boy with a linen cloth brought from Egypt. It is a burial shroud, and suddenly that boy comes crawling out of his grave, raised from the dead, and just as they're about to arrest Jesus, this resurrected boy carrying his burial shroud comes walking into the middle of this event and says, "Anybody know what's going on?" And one of the soldiers says, "Hey, somebody get that kid." Because the last thing they need at this moment is another story of another resurrection. Stop him, get him. They reached out, tried to seize him, and the Bible says he fled from them naked. All they ended up with was his burial shroud. They look as a naked, resurrected boy runs off into the distance between all the graves, between all the trees, disappears from sight, and they're standing there in the Garden of Gethsemane holding the burial shroud of a child that Jesus just raised from the dead. It was an accidental resurrection. Jesus didn't even intend to do it. There was just so much power in demonstration that it touched this dead child and he came crawling out of his grave. That's how much power was working in the Garden of Gethsemane, and that's why it was impossible for them just to take Jesus and arrest him. He knocked the soldiers flat. He healed